Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to Wednesday Workshops with Whitney. I'm going to give us a couple minutes, make sure that other people can join. And if you want to let me know your name, you can put it in the chat box, and that would be great. All right, I'm going to wait maybe another minute or two, and then, oh good, we got 3 people. Awesome. All right, if any of you would like to type your name in the chat box so I know kind of who's here, that would be great, but you don't have to if you don't want to. But we're going to get started shortly. Thanks for being here. Hey, Elmo Duncy, great. I'm so glad you were able to navigate over to this one. Yeah, so that was the announcement I wanted to make at the very beginning was I'm moving the Wednesday Workshops with Whitney YouTube page over to our HHCD or Holston Human Capital Development YouTube page so everything can be on the same page and you can see, what other activities we might be making live streams on. So from now on, if you need to get to the video, just type HHCD into the search bar at the top of YouTube, and you'll see the different videos. So great. Thank you all for being here. Okay, so today's episode is on suicide education and prevention. But before we get started, hey Liz, happy to have you here. But before we get started, we're going to do our icebreaker question. Okay. All right. So I will ask the question and then give you all about a minute to come up with your responses. And if you'd like to share, you can type it in the chat box. Okay. So if you were to, if you could be any animal or non-human living creature, so I guess it would be like, you could be like an animal, wildlife, something or another, what would you be and why? So if you could be an animal, or if you changed into an animal, let's say, which isn't going to happen, which would you choose and why? Ooh, Modensi, what a great response. Modensi said if she could be an animal, she would be a unicorn to help save the world. I love that. That's very creative. Elizabeth, dog for unconditional love. I love that. Very nice. Great. I was going to say, if I could be an animal, I think it would be really cool to be a butterfly because you get to start off as something that's a caterpillar on the ground, and then you get to go through this transformation into a butterfly and you get to fly, and they're really pretty. So I like that. Great. Thank you for sharing. Okay, great. So now we're moving on to our suicide education and prevention. I have some information we'll go through. And then I have, after we go through the information, I have a couple like discussion questions. And then in the end, we're going to finish with our mindfulness meditation script that's called Naming the Feelings. So if anyone has any questions, comments, or concerns throughout, feel free to just type in the chat box and I will address it as soon as I see it. All right, great. Okay, so suicide education and prevention. What I want to start with is we're going to go through different suicide-related terms and define them, because sometimes it's confusing when you're like, well, what's a suicide attempt versus what's suicide ideation? There's a lot of different, oh, hold on one second. Someone's trying to join. So let me get, so let me see. Just gotta give this out real quick. Okay. Perfect. Sorry about that. All right, great. Okay, so we're going to go through these terms so we kind of get a better grasp of understanding of these different suicide-related terms. Okay, so the first one is suicide. Suicide is defined as death caused by self-directed injurious behavior with an intent to die as a result of the behavior. So when you would say someone has committed suicide, that means that they have died through killing themselves. Okay. Suicide attempt. A suicide attempt is a non-fatal, self-directed, potentially injurious behavior with an intent to die as a result of the behavior. A suicide attempt may or may not result in injury. Sorry that it's super wordy. But, okay, so a suicide attempt is someone survived. They attempted suicide, but they didn't commit suicide. So they may have, tried to hang themselves and the rope broke, or took a bunch of medicine and ended up at the hospital with their stomach pumped. So they survived versus dying. And that's an attempt. And that they wanted to die. Okay. Next, suicidal self-directed violence. Behavior that is self-directed and deliberately results in injury or the potential for injury to oneself. There is evidence, whether implicit or explicit, of suicidal intent. This encompasses suicidal deaths and suicidal attempts. Okay. Okay, so basically what they're saying is suicidal self-directed violence is almost the umbrella where you can have a suicide underneath the suicide attempt. They both fall underneath. Whether you have passed away from suicide or you attempted would fall under the category of suicidal self-directed violence. Okay. Other suicidal behavior and preparatory acts. acts or preparation towards making a suicide attempt, but before potential for harm has begun. This can include anything beyond a verbalization or thought, such as assembling a method, which an example, they say buying a gun, collecting pills, or preparing for one's death by suicide, such as writing a suicide note or giving a bunch of things away. Referred to as aborted suicide attempt by the American Psychiatric Association. So this would be, okay, so that's preparing. So this is beyond, yes, someone saying, yes, I've thought about hurting myself. Because normally after you talk to someone and you say, have you been thinking about hurting yourself? And they say yes, the next question that therapists oftentimes ask is, do you have a plan? Have you thought about the preparation period right now of gathering things that you need to act on the suicidal thought? Okay, next. And if you have any questions about any of this, feel free. Suicidal ideation. Passive thoughts about wanting to be dead or active thoughts about killing oneself, but not accompanied by the preparatory behavior. So that's what I was going to say. I almost should have gone there first, because the suicidal ideation is before the preparatory acts. So that's the, thinking like maybe, I feel like I'd be, maybe better off dead. I don't want to be here anymore, but you don't have a plan. Okay. Self-harm. An act with a non-fatal outcome in which an individual deliberately initiates a non-habitual behavior that, without intervention from others, will cause self-harm, or deliberately ingest a substance in excess of the prescribed or generally recognized therapeutic dosage, and which is aimed at realizing changes which the subject desired via the actual or expected physical consequences. So that's very wordy. Self-harm examples might be people who cut themselves. Some people, burn themselves. I guess what they're saying here is taking too much medication, knowing that it's not good for you, but still doing it, but not taking to the point where you think you would die. And then lastly, suicidal behavior. Suicidal behavior includes suicide, suicide attempts, other suicidal behavior, and preparatory acts. Okay, so that is pretty much almost all of this underneath that umbrella. So hopefully that helped. That's kind of a lot of different stuff. But what I think is really important is, okay, so suicidal ideation is just thinking about it. Like, maybe I'd be better off dead, or I don't want to live anymore. I just want to die. Just thinking, but no preparation. Committing suicide is that you have died from an act of killing yourself. And then the suicide attempt is you tried to kill yourself, but you survived. And then also, I guess, thinking about the preparatory acts of, someone saying like, I want to kill myself, and I bought a gun, and I'm going to do it on the state or whatnot, which is very serious. So, okay, great. All right. Suicide prevention. As the 10th leading cause of death in the United States and the second leading cause of death after accidents for people aged 10 to 34, suicide is a serious public health problem. In 2016, in the United States, nearly 45,000 people died by suicide, and the rate of suicide has increased every year since 2006. An estimated 1.3 million adults attempt suicide each year, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or the CDC. More than 1 in 5 people who died by suicide had expressed their suicide attempt. So with that is that they opened up to someone or in some form expressed that they didn't want to live anymore. They may have gotten help even too, but kept trying. So, but with that, we're talking about there's a lot of things that we can do to help educate other people and to try to prevent this from happening. Men are more than 3 times more likely than women to take their lives. Firearms are the most common method of suicide, used in about half of all suicides. So, what's interesting about this is statistic-wise, men are 3 times more likely to complete suicide than women. There may be more women that attempt, but more men that complete. And about half of all suicides are related to firearms or guns. Yet, suicide is preventable. Knowing the risk factors and recognizing the warning signs for suicide can help prevent suicide. So, next is risk factors, warning signs, and protective factors. Suicide is linked to mental disorders, particularly depression and alcohol use disorders, and the strongest risk factor for suicide is a previous suicide attempt. So, if you're working with someone or you know someone who's talking about, potentially not wanting to live or something that, suicidal, you want to ask them if have you attempted suicide in the past? And if they say yes, that means they're at a higher level, because if they've already done it once, they're more likely to do it again, to attempt at least, and they might complete it this time. So it's very serious. The Suicide Prevention Resource Center defines risk and protective factors and warning signs. Okay, so risk factors are characteristics that make it more likely an individual will consider, attempt, or die by suicide. So that's a risk factor. A warning sign indicates an immediate risk of suicide. So that's we'll talk about obviously the warning signs. And then protective factors are characteristics that make it less likely that an individual will consider, attempt, or die by suicide. I'm glad that they defined these as well. So, some risk factors for suicide. I guess I could ask. Does anyone know what any risk factors for suicide are? So that's certain events and circumstances that may increase the risk. Well, the first one is previous suicide attempts, just like we just talked about. If they've already attempted in the past, that is a big indicator that they have a high risk to try again. A history of suicide in the family. I'm not sure what, genetics have in it, but sometimes having the means, okay, absolutely. So maybe, would you say potentially having a weapon or, something toxic that they could ingest in the house or, stuff like that? That's definitely a good point, Liz. Oh, you're right. You got it there. Having the means, actually. So I have down here, it says access to lethal means, such as keeping firearms in the house. That's a big question that I've had to ask in prior work with people when I used to work at a psychiatric hospital. So oftentimes, if someone has attempted suicide and you ask if someone else in their family has attempted or committed, a lot of times other people in the family have either attempted or committed. So that's interesting. Substance abuse or misuse, if they're drinking too much or taking medication improperly or using drugs. because it kind of distorts your thinking. And a lot of times, like, alcohol is a depressant. So if people drink too much, it can cause depression or make you feel more depressed. Mood disorders, such as depression and bipolar disorder. Like Liz said, access to lethal means, absolutely. Losses and other events. Oh, one second. Sorry, excuse me. For example, the breakup of a relationship or a death, academic failures, legal difficulties, financial difficulties, bullying, also cyberbullying, a history of trauma or abuse, chronic physical illness, including chronic pain, and exposure to the suicidal behavior of others. That's an interesting one. I don't know if I've heard before. So being around other people that I guess may have attempted or are expressing it, or I was going to say the suicide behaviors. Okay, yeah. Suicide attempts, suicidal behavior, and preparatory acts. So being around other people that are struggling like that can increase your risk as well. So, okay, so it says, if you need help, please call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255 or go to www.suicidepreventionlifeline.org and click to chat. We should have probably on the website, or I just created a flyer with our helpline information on it, and also it has the crisis text line, the domestic violence line, and the suicide prevention line. So I might be able to put it up on YouTube, but if not, we're figuring out putting it up on our website. And if you're struggling, or anyone you know, feel free to reach out to your HHCD resident service coordinator to kind of help get you connected to get help, because with everything going on in the world, there is an increase in a lot of mental health issues and traumas and whatnot. Okay. In some cases, a recent stressor or sudden catastrophic event, failure or can leave people feeling desperate, unable to see a way out, become a tipping point towards suicide. Liz said, we just had 2 assumed suicides in the river by Riverwalk. Was very disturbing to those that witnessed recovery efforts. Wow. Yes, absolutely. And that was one reason why I wanted to have this group today, was I know there has been an increase. So we want to make sure that people know that if they're feeling hopeless or like they don't want to live anymore, there is help out there. So, okay. A recent CDC report highlights the complexity of suicide. While a mental health condition may be a contributing factor for many people, the report notes that many factors contribute to suicide among those with and without known mental health conditions, such as, once again, talking about what's going on right now. For a lot of people, the pandemic and the civil unrest may have been one of the biggest disruptors of their life. I know personally for me, I haven't lived through a pandemic before, and this is an extremely stressful and depressing time. So that's why I want everyone to know that HHCD is here to help our residents, and if it's beyond our means, that we will connect residents to get the help that they need. A relationship problem was the top factor contributing to suicide, followed by crisis in the past or upcoming 2 weeks and problematic substance use. CDC reports that about half, or 54%, of people who die by suicide did not have a known mental health condition. So that died by suicide did not have a mental health disorder, or if they did, it wasn't, they hadn't seen a doctor about it. However, many of them may have been dealing with mental health challenges that had not been diagnosed or known to those around them. So actually just what I said. So they could have had something, but they hadn't gotten help. Okay. So next, warning signs. Does anyone know of any warning signs of suicide or warning sign behavior that you might want to be concerned about if you see someone doing these types of behaviors? So here it says, often talking or writing about death, dying, or suicide. Making comments about being hopeless, helpless, or worthless, such as, I'd be better off dead. Ooh, Modensi, yes. Teens that are cutting themselves. That is definitely like self-injurious behavior, just like we talked about. That's one of the self-harm acts, which is definitely a warning sign that someone is going through something that could result in a suicide attempt or completed suicide. Withdrawal. Great. Yes. So that would be not wanting to be withdrawal. Yeah, exactly. Withdrawal from family, friends. That's kind of like what they talk about with depression too. So like isolation and loss of interest in things that you used to like to do. Okay. Expressions of having no reason for living, no sense of purpose in life, saying things like, it would be better off if I wasn't here, or I want out, or, you know, sometimes people will talk about like, well, my family would be better off without me in their life, because sometimes people go through maybe rehab or different mental health or drug, alcohol issues, and it puts a lot of strain on the family, but that doesn't mean that the family would rather them not be around. But sometimes, you know, what's going on in someone's head makes them think that, you know, all the things that are happening with them, that their family maybe would rather them not be there. Increased alcohol and or drug misuse. Like Liz said, withdrawal from friends, family, and community. Reckless behavior or more risky activities, seemingly without thinking. Okay. Modensi, or thinking nobody cares about them. Yes, absolutely. Dramatic mood changes. And that could be kind of, if you think about with the withdrawal, like if someone seemed happy, well, actually, I think it's kind of the opposite. Someone might be really, really, really depressed. And then once they have their suicide plan, all of a sudden they're really happy. And you're like, whoa, this seems like a whole different person. A lot of people feel relieved once they have their suicide plan. And that it's just a matter of time before they will attempt or commit suicide. So they no longer are feeling as depressed as they were before, which is interesting. Talking about feeling trapped or being a burden to others. Like I was saying, a burden to others. Ooh, this one's interesting too. Gathering special items to give friends or family. Saying what sounds like a final goodbye. The special items thing is really interesting because one of things I've read about is that someone who may have come up with a suicidal plan will all of a sudden give away their, you know, things that were prized possessions to them for no reason. Okay, and lastly, of the factors, protective factors. Does anyone know of any protective factors? Which the protective factors are characteristics that make it less likely that an individual will consider, attempt, or die by suicide. I'm done saying no. Okay, that's fine. All right, so some protective factors are contacts with providers, such as follow-up phone call from healthcare professional. Even having a, let's say, therapist or psychiatrist or someone regularly already sees. That is a protective factor because they have someone that's working with them on what's happening with their mental health. Effective mental health care, easy access to a variety of clinical interventions, like what I was just saying, therapy or a psychiatrist or psychologist or things like that. Strong connections to individuals, family, community, and social institutions. So being maybe close to family or friends, school, maybe church. Yep. Oh, Liz, right when I was saying church, she said religion. Absolutely. So having some sort of connection, and often with the religion as well as having a belief in something higher than ourselves can be very productive. And then they say problem solving and conflict resolution skills. So being able to, something happens and not being like, oh my God, this is the end of the world. Like, I'm just going to die. Kind of like, okay, I'm going to get through this. And what do I need to do to get through this? Okay. As with mental illness, one of the biggest barriers to preventing suicide is stigma, which prevents many people from seeking help. So, and that's within, the United States. Is some people think that, or kind of, I guess different generations were taught to think that mental illness or depression makes you weaker, or that there's something wrong with you, and that especially towards men, that, people might be like, what's wrong with you? Why are you acting like a girl, or insensitive, or this or that and the other? And that's not what I think. But just to not get help, to put it under the rug, your feelings. When really, if you need to talk about something, it's good to get help. The CDC report recommends a comprehensive public health approach to suicide prevention, and it identifies strategies that states and communities can undertake, including such measures as teaching coping and problem-solving skills to help people manage challenges, expanding options for temporary assistance to those in need, and connecting people at risk to effective and coordinated mental health care. Excellent. So, what you can do. If someone indicates they're considering suicide, listen and take their concerns seriously. Don't be afraid to ask questions about their plans. Let them know you care and they are not alone. Encourage them to seek help immediately from a knowledgeable professional, and don't leave them alone. Modensi. Sometimes doctors prescribe medication that could cause suicidal thoughts. Oh, Modensi, I'm so glad that you brought that up. That is so true. There are some medications, especially some medications people get for depression, amongst others, that they say sometimes the side effect is an increased feeling of suicide. And that's really scary because you might be feeling depressed and you want help and you need medication, but the last thing you need is to start feeling more suicidal on a medication. So that is definitely something to think about for sure. Thank you, Modensi. Okay, so this is 5 tips from the CDC for what you can do if you're concerned about a friend or a loved one. Ask someone you are worried about if they're thinking about suicide. While people may be hesitant to ask, research shows this is helpful. Keep them safe. Reduce access to lethal means for those at risk. So that would be, if someone's seriously talking to you about it and they have a gun at home, you might say, hey, do you think maybe it would be okay if I held on to your gun for a little while since you're feeling this way? Keep them safe. I just read that, sorry. Be there with them. Listen to what they need. Help them connect with ongoing support. Stay connected. Follow up to see how they're doing. Okay, so that is that article. Just wanted to go over this. These were a couple different questions. Oh, this is a good question. If a person seems troubled, is it safe to ask if they are thinking about hurting themselves? Can asking increase the danger of suicide? That is one of those, it's a myth, actually, that asking questions will increase the chance that people will harm themselves. Asking questions shows that you care. One of the most important things you can offer as a therapist, family member, bystander, or friend is living proof that someone cares. Modensi, yeah, you think yes. And you know what? What's so great is just like when I asked that, it's one of the myths. There's some myths about suicide that maybe if I'm going to ask them and bring it up, maybe it's going to make them think about it more and want to do it more. But actually, fortunately, it does not increase their chances. It actually, like they said, shows that you care about them by asking. People start thinking of suicide when they feel hopeless and alone in their struggle. They do not see a way out. Telling them they are not alone and really meaning it is huge. They desperately need someone to care. Oh, this is good too. What kind of questions can you ask someone if you're worried about their mental health? Sometimes you don't want to just say, like, are you suicidal? Sometimes it's hard to know exactly what are the right questions or what questions won't maybe offend someone who is feeling suicidal. They said, here are some questions that you can ask. You seem really depressed lately. How are you handling that? Are you getting help? Do you think about hurting yourself? What do you think about your future? Are you feeling hopeless? And have you thought about doing something about that? In general, you ask to learn if the person could be a danger to him or herself. Ooh, this is also good. Okay. What if you're not sure what to make of the answer or the person is resisting help? If you're in a relationship with someone and you are fearful they might hurt themselves, tell them so. You can say, and it doesn't have to be just if you're in a relationship. It can be if you know someone or someone in your family or someone you care about. I am worried about you. I care about you. I'm scared you may be thinking of hurting yourself because ... Tell your loved one why you are worried. Listen. Offer to help them get support. Remind them they are not alone and that you care. Call a therapist as soon as possible. You will need support to take good care of yourself and your loved one. Your loved one will need help to evaluate and treat their depression. You may not be able to see the therapist right away, but your call will help you get the support you need. So I think this is really important because you need to reach out. And even if it might be the ideation of, well, maybe I'd be better off dead. Maybe it's not I'm going to kill myself tomorrow. So calling a therapist and setting up an appointment is important. If someone is really not okay and they're telling you they have a plan, call the crisis line or just call 911 because the person's going to need to go get help. Oh, here we go. If you see the warning signs of suicide, call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255 or 911. Oh, great. And then there's the crisis text line where you can, if someone's struggling, they can just text message with someone else and get crisis help. And so you're supposed to text START to 741-741. If you ask someone, have you thought about hurting yourself? And the answer is yes. Can you believe the answer? I would urge you to believe the answer. They are telling you they need help. And this can be a struggle because there are sometimes people that, they are reaching out for help. But sometimes people say, I want to kill myself, and then they don't end up doing that. It doesn't matter. If they say they want to or they're thinking about it, you have to take it seriously no matter what. Because they need help. So, what do you do with the answer? What do you do when you realize, for example, my child said, I've thought about taking all the medicine in the cabinet. What do you do then? It's understandable to kind of feel frozen at that point of, oh my God, someone just told me that they want to hurt themselves or they're thinking about themselves. What do I do? If your child has told you something that shows a thought out way they would end their life, so that's a plan or a preparatory action, call their therapist, a suicide prevention hotline, hospital, or 911. You may decide to take them to the nearest emergency room to avoid leaving them alone. So I think that's important. If someone's expressing this, you don't want to leave them alone. And maybe they'll feel better if they do talk on the suicide prevention line or text message. But if it seems like, you might not be able to be with them or they really need help, maybe they're trying to go get something in the house, you need to call 911 so that they can get help then. It does not matter if your child says they are going to hate you for getting them help, or your friend, or your girlfriend or boyfriend. They may hate you, but by taking action, they will still be alive, and that is the priority. And even if they may hate you in that moment, they're not going to hate you forever. What if I suspect my child is just being dramatic, or my friend or other loved one? A person who feels enough emotional pain to make desperate statements needs someone to assist them in getting support. It is true that a person can talk of dying and not intend to take his or her own life. But a suicide attempt or suicide ideation are not mere stunts for attention. They are important ways people communicate dangerous levels of distress. Modensi says, first, move the medicine. Absolutely, I agree. Then for help, but you can't make them accept help. That is very true, especially if they are an adult. That's the tough part. Most people who die by suicide tell someone they plan to hurt themselves before they take their own lives, says the American Society for Suicide Prevention. If someone talks to you of their own death or the means to carry it out, you have a precious, urgent opportunity to act before it's too late. I have one more page. So what I'm going to do is, because this is so important, I'm going to finish this page real quick, and we will do our breathing exercise next time, if that's all right. Because with everything going on, and like Liz said, there's been some suicidal activity happening, I really want to just finish this real quick. Okay, next question. Isn't suicide rare? Suicide is not nearly as rare as people think. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for people aged 10 to 24. And that is second only to accidental death. Who is the greatest risk of suicide? No one is 100% immune to mental health conditions that can raise the risk of suicide. People who are experiencing depression are at risk for suicide. It can come with general depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and bipolar disorder. It can come with a number of other mental health conditions, as well as some people that don't have mental health conditions but have a tremendous amount of stress or trauma, and they don't know what to do, and they feel like there's no way out. Teens and young adults can experience emotions with greater intensity since their brain is not fully developed until their mid-20s, and they may have difficulty regulating their thoughts and feelings within a range they can tolerate. That is very important, actually, because your prefrontal cortex of your brain is in charge of regulating your emotions and thinking things through. So if that's not fully developed till mid, so yes, that does put them at a higher risk. In his book, Brainstorm, The Power and Purpose of the Teenage Brain, that sounds good, psychologist Daniel Siegel describes the emotional spark of adolescence, in which emotions can arise rapidly and intensely without the calming influence of the prefrontal cortex. In parentheses, he says, the reasoning part of the brain, which redevelops during this time. Therefore, people may be more susceptible to suicidal ideation during adolescence and young adulthood than at other points in their life. Resist the urge to judge, dismiss, or try to talk someone out of how they feel. Asking questions and taking action to get the needed help and support are the two most important things we can do to prevent tragedy of suicide. So that's asking questions and taking action. Even if you feel hopeless, there is hope. We are only human. No one is perfect. Sometimes we misunderstand each other or get overwhelmed by what is going on inside of ourselves. But we do not need to be perfect to be healthy. We do not need to be perfect to be healthier, happier, and more supportive to ourselves and each other in ways we need the most. People can and do recover even from the darkest, most frightening places a mind can go. Even if you feel like giving up, hope is not lost. Hope and caring are meaningful, powerful gifts we can give each other. Ones that make all the difference in relieving anguish and saving lives. Great. So that's that. Sorry, this episode's a little bit longer, but I think that was really important. If you want to let me know what you thought about that, you can, I always want to put my phone number, text message me or there's my email if you want to email me. And if you ever have any suggestions, questions, comments, feel free to email me. If you have any topics you'd like me to present on, that would be great as well. So thank you so much for participating, and thank you all for coming and viewing this episode, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Okay, bye-bye.